Hello, this is Basar. In this tutorial, we are going to practice the basics of Spring security. We have this repository, and previously we have used this repository in the password encoding tutorial. Here we have the branches of main bcrypt and security basics. The bcrypt one is the one we have implemented in the password encoder tutorial. And in this tutorial, we are going to do the things you will see in the security basics branch. And we are going to do our implementation on top of this bcrypt branch. So let's start with that. First, let's clone this repository. So here we're running git clone. And let's open this in Visual Studio Code. So I am switching to the branch bcrypt. And let's check the project. Here in pom.xml, we have the Spring Boot version 2.4 and running Java version 11. We have the Spring Data JPA, Spring Security, Spring Starter Web, and we also have the development tools, dev tools, and Lombok, and we have embedded H2 database, and we have the test dependencies. And in the project, we have the user package, we have this user entity, we have the user controller, we have this endpoint, and we are sending requests to this endpoint. The user object is received, and before saving it to database, we are encoding this user's password and saving it to database. Now we are going to introduce the Spring security. And we already have the Spring security in our application as a dependency, but we excluded that one right here. We just used the Spring security for the bcrypt password encoding algorithm. Now we are going to include this one. So removing this exclude part. And we are going to have two endpoints here. And one of them is going to be for secured endpoint, and the other one is going to be the public endpoint. So let's turn this main class into a REST controller right here, REST controller, and we will have a get mapping here, and this is for secured, and this is going to be returning back a response. Let's say it is just going to be sending back, this is secured. And let's have another endpoint, and let's say this is public. Again, this is going to be returning a string back, return this is public. So basically, we are expecting this endpoint, this secure endpoint, to be accessible only if we have valid user credentials in our request. And for this public endpoint, we don't have to pass any user credentials in the request. So saving this one and running the application. Now the application is running. Let's go with the first path. Let's try to access to public. So our endpoint is HTTP localhost 8080 public. So we are receiving this page, this login page. We didn't define it in anywhere in our application. This is coming with the Spring security, and by default the Spring security configuration is like this. All endpoints are secured, and it has built in this login page, and that's how it is working. So what we will do is we are going to add our own configuration. So let's go to our project again. Let's add a new package right here. Let's call it configuration, and let's add our configuration class, security configuration. In this class, we are going to extend web security configurer adapter. So this is coming from the Spring Security package. And in this class, we are going to override. There are 3 configure methods, and we are going to override this one, having the HTTP security. And in this one, we will do our configuration like this. We are going to use this HTTP security instance, and we will call its methods. It's going to be building the configuration for us. So first, we are going to tell we want to authorize the requests, and we are going to authorize the request based on some patterns, and we can set the patterns like this. We can either go with the specific HTTP method, or we can combine the HTTP method with the path, or we can go with the path only. So we can say we want the requests going to this secured endpoint to be authenticated. And we will also tell that, and we will authorize request and any request other than the secured one to be permitted. So this is going to be permitting the request other than this secured one. And finally, we have to add an annotation for this class, and that is enable web security. So let's save this one. And the application is restarted. And if we go back to our page here, and if we try to access to the public once again, here we are receiving this is public. But if we want to go to secured, we are receiving this error. It is saying you are not authorized to access this endpoint. So we override the configuration of the Spring Security, and it used to have the login page. It was showing the login page back to us, but now we override that one. So it is returning back the error page. The form login is suitable for the applications having the server-side rendering, but in this one we are building just a REST application. So it's going to be just a REST request serving application. So let's change the authentication mechanism from form login to basic authentication first. So here we will set HTTP basic. So saving this one. Now the application is restarted, but this time let's test with the Postman. Let's go with the public path first. So here we are receiving this is public, and let's go with the secured endpoint. And here we are receiving the 401. Now in console, if we check right here, the Spring Security is generating a user for us, and it has this password. So let's copy this one, and let's go to Postman and send our request with going with the basic authentication, and the username is user and password is the one we just copied. Now sending the request, and here we are receiving this is secured. But let's try one more thing here. If we go back to no authentication and send our request, we are still receiving this is secured. And this is happening because Spring Security is creating a session, and even we don't add the authentication to our request, the session is in the request. So that's why we are still able to access to the secured endpoint. So we can just go to these cookies and delete this one. And if we send our request once again, we are going to receive this 401 back. So let's disable this session creation part on backend. So here we can configure again the HTTP with the session management, and we can set the session creation policy with the value of session session creation policy stateless. So saving this one, the application is restarted, just copying the new password. In each restart, Spring is generating a new password for that user. So this is receiving 401, going to basic authentication, the username is the user and the password is this new one, sending request, we are receiving this is secured, and if I go with the no authentication, we are receiving 401. So for REST endpoints, we must be receiving the authorization header in every request. And if we try to access to this secured endpoint with the browser, here we are seeing this pop-up. It is the built-in functionality of browser, and it is asking for the username and password. And if we type our user and password, we are accessing to this endpoint. So this is basically triggered because of the, let's check here. In this one we are receiving 401, but let's check the headers. We have this www-authenticate header. So if we remove that one from our responses from the backend in 401 responses, then the browser will not pop up that to user. So let's do that. And we do that right here. HTTP basic is actually having a configuration called as authentication entry point. And there is default implementation. And that one is basic authentication entry point. And if we check the implementation, here it has this part. It is adding this header to the response and setting the unauthorized 401 response status. We will basically do the same implementation, but we are not going to add this header. So let's do this way. We will set authentication entry point, and let's implement that one right here, authentication entry point. So we are going to create the implementation, and this class is looking for this method, the commands method, and in the commands method we are just going to send the response having this 401 value. So just fixing the errors here. So that's it. Now saving this one, and the application is restarted, going back to browser, refreshing this page, and here we are receiving this 401 unauthorized. So far we have access to secured endpoint with the user created by the Spring Security, but let's use our own user. But first let's do a couple of configuration. We have this endpoint user controller. We can post our user to this endpoint and it's going to be saved to database, but with the Spring Boot 2.4 the behavior of the H2 is changed. We are going to save the database to a file. We don't want to lose the data in each restart, so let's do that configuration right here. And we used to have this property which is for making the in-memory database name to be this one. Let's find it here, this one. Otherwise it's going to be generated dynamically, so that's why we added this configuration. But now we are going to remove this one. Instead we are going to set a specific URL, and this is going to be JDBC H2, and we are going to set a relative path. We are going to set the current directory, and let's say our database name will be this one. So this is going to be generating a file with this name, and this is going to be stored in this current folder. And before Spring Boot 2.4, this was enough for creating the database. But with the 2.4, we have to set the username for the database. So we will set another parameter, Spring Data Source username, and let's say it is going to be SA. This was the default username for the H2 in memory mode. And there is one more configuration. The database schema is not automatically generated for the H2 anymore. So we have to tell Spring JPA Hibernate DDR Auto, and let's set it to update. So this is going to be updating the database tables with our entities in our project. So this is the configuration. The application is restarted, and we have this temp DB right here. And now we are going to add user to database. So opening Postman once again, we are going to send a post request to this endpoint, this API 10 users. So it is localhost API 10 users, and we are going to send post request, and the body will have JSON, and in this JSON we will have the fields of, let's open the user object. We have the username, email, and password. So let's say username will be user1, email is user1@mail.com, and the password is this one. So sending the request. The request is failing with this one, and that is happening because again, another default behavior is kicking in right here, and that is the CSRF protection. CSRF is cross-site request forgery. Again, going back to our Spring security configuration, and let's disable that one, adding HTTP CSRF disable right here, saving it. And the application is restarted. Again, going back to Postman, sending request, and here we are seeing the 200 OK, and we see the user ID here, and the user password is encrypted like this one. Now let's try to access this secured endpoint with our user. For that, we need to load user from database first, and Spring Security is looking for an implementation of user details service to do that operation. So again, opening the project, and let's add a new class right here. Let's call it user auth service, and this is going to be implementing user details service, and we need to implement this method load user by username. And as you can see here, we are receiving this username. So the request will contain the basic authentication. There will be username and password, and this user details service is going to be receiving that username. So based on this username, we can query and get the user from database. So first we need to have a corresponding query in user repository. So let's create one here. We will be creating the query based on the Spring Data method naming convention. So we are going to receive a user from this query, and we will find that user by username. And we will pass the username as property to this method. Basically, this method is having these keywords find by, and the username part is basically the field in user object, this one. So it's going to be querying the user table based on this username. And we can add other queries like this one, find by email, and so on. So now we are going to use this user repository here in user auth service. So first we need to turn this user auth service into a service, so that Spring is going to be generating an instance from this one, and we can inject with this auto-wired user repository here. So we have the user repository, and here we can get the user from database. User, let's say user in DB, and it's going to be user repository find by username, and we will pass the username we are receiving in this method. And let's do this control. If there is no user, if in DB is null, let's throw an exception. Throw new username not found exception, and let's say user not found. Otherwise, we have to return the user details implementation. So we can just create one right here, return new user details, and this has methods, so let's implement them here. So we have the authorities, the password, username, and we have other methods like the account expiration, lock, or credential, or enabled these kind of account operation fields. So let's fill these values. For now, we don't have any user roles, so let's create one right here. Let's say this is going to be a collection, so we will create one by authority utils, and we will create authority list, and let's say our user role is going to be user. If we would be having role-based implementation, then we would be storing this user role in database, and we would be generating this list based on the user roles. But for now, let's just go with this way. And the password is this user object's password, so let's get it like this: in db get password, and this is in db get username, and the others are Boolean. And to have an active account, we have to set all of them as true. So just selecting these lines and setting all of them to true like this. So let's save all these changes. So application is restarted, and if we go to Postman and try to access with our user, we have this user1, and that user's password is this one. Let's show it. And if I send the request, let's switch to body, we are receiving this 500, and it is saying there is no password encoder. So Spring Security is expecting a password encoder to be configured, and there is no default configuration for that one. So they don't have the default because they want to be sure as a developer we are aware of what needs to be done here. So in user service, we were encrypting the user password with this bcrypt password encoder. So we will use the same encoder in the Spring Security configuration. So in security configuration, we will overwrite another configuration method. So the other one is this configure, taking this authentication manager builder. And in this one, we are going to run out, and it has user details service. We will pass the user details service to this one, by the way, we didn't need to do this before. This user auth service was automatically picked by Spring Security, because the logic behind that one is like this. Spring Boot is scanning our packages and doing all the configurations for us. So if it finds a class implementing this user details service, it knows that this is going to be used by Spring Security. So it is passing this object to Spring Security on behalf of us. So that's how the Spring Security was using this service. But now we are going to set password encoder, so we need to combine both this service with the password encoder we are going to use. So let's inject that service right here. User auth service. And here in this configure, we are going to pass this service to this method, user detail service, user auth service, and the next parameter is the password encoder. So we can just pass new bcrypt password encoder. So saving this one. Now the application is restarted, going back to Postman, sending our request, and here we are able to access to this endpoint. This is secured. And to make sure that our credentials are working, let's go with another user, or let's go with different password like this one. And here we are saving 401. So this is how the Spring Security is working. So we have completed our implementation, and with this configuration we are able to secure our endpoints, and we are checking our users from database. Now let's do a little change here. We have this bcrypt instance right here, and we also have that one right here. So we are creating two instances, but we can create this bcrypt instance as a bean, and we can ask Spring to inject to our services. So let's do it this way. In security configuration, let's have this method right here. Let's call, this is going to be returning password encoder, and this is the method name, and basically this is going to be returning new instance of bcrypt password encoder. And we are going to use the bean annotation here, and instead of new bcrypt instance we are going to call this password encoder. And in the user service we are not going to create new instance, but we are expecting Spring to inject password encoder. This is going to be bcrypt password encoder. So we will receive it through this constructor, and we will just pass it to our variable, and we will be using it here in the save method. So let's save all these changes, and let's go with the request once again. Here it is working, and let's add another user. Let's say this is user 2. And we have user 2, and if we go to this endpoint with the user 2, we are receiving this is secured. And that's it. We have completed our implementation. Thanks for watching, and hope to see you in the next tutorials.